Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode or another chapter, as we like to call it, of the Modern Mindset podcast. This is episode number 8, and we are excited to be back after a season break that we took over the last 2 weeks. I hope you missed us. I hope you've been listening back to some of the playbacks of our last 7 episodes. I started off my return by quickly taking a look at how our podcast has been performing in preparation, and I am so thrilled to see that there's been a lot of attention around the Better Relationships episode, which gets me really fired up. I think I was really thrilled with how we decided to take that season break. That last episode that we left, I feel like we left it at the right part of how a season break should have been left. So I'm really excited about it. My name is Mahfouz Chowdhury. I'm here with my co-host Camille. Camille, I got to start by asking you, how have you been spending your podcast vacation, meaning the last 2 weeks that we've taken off during the season break? You've been busy. You've been busy from the sounds of it. I'm trying to figure out whether which one I should follow up on, whether it's the one of how on earth you hurt your foot or the one about your book. But let's start with the hurting your foot one. I feel like if I don't ask you, I'm going to get a lot of hate mail of being a non-sympathetical jerk without that, not even caring about your powerful foot you got there. So what on earth happened to your foot? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But your idea of like, am I doing enough? Can I add more? I feel like that's a mistake we all fall into, but it's not always a mistake, right? Because you actually don't know, like, could you have done more? And then you kind of know after, and hopefully the answer is yes rather than no, and you learn the hard way. But I'm sorry to hear that, man. It's You're an absolute beast. You definitely don't brag about it enough. So I have to sometimes brag about it for you. But when I spend a day in the gym with you, it blows my mind with how much weight you can lift compared to the average human being. And you don't talk about it enough, but you are a freaking beast, man. Let me just start with that. But what does the recovery stage look like for your foot right now? What does a doctor know indeed, especially about health more than anything else. Man, that's good to hear. I gotta tell you, it's I'm excited to touch base with you again and reunite and have a lot of the great conversations and maybe an occasional workout with you again. I'm slowly making my way back into the gym. Over the last few weeks, a big part of why the season break happened was simply because of the fact that we finally use this as an opportunity to do a little bit of traveling on my side. We just released. I had a very memorable night where we had the release of our official journal that myself and my girlfriend Priya released, called "Journey to Your Best Self," Journey to My Best Self. And I was excited to be able to do the launch event. And it was a really interesting concept where I think a lot about when the release date starts approaching and when the launch date is coming up. It really starts becoming what I think the most stressful week for any single person that's trying to release something. Think about an artist that's about to release an album. That week before the album release, you see everything. You see heavy billboards around the city. You see nonstop social media promotions. You see music videos. They even sometimes put on shows, but the artist is so aggressively pushing just as much as the record label out of the fear that it's not going to sell well. And it becomes a very stressful week. I had a different thought around this. And, in the spirit of modern mindset, I had a very fresh perspective on this where I said, instead of stressing in the last week, why don't we just take off, jump on a plane, and go on vacation and come back just the day before our launch event so that we're refreshed and we feel really good. So, my girlfriend and I, we jumped on a plane from Toronto. We flew out to Vancouver and we spent 4 days in Vancouver, jumped on another plane and went to Alberta, spent the remaining time in Alberta, and then came back. And I have to tell you, I feel incredibly refreshed. And you were there at the launch event, which I'm very grateful of. It was nice to see your webcam go on and see your handsome face show up, see the room that you're in that I recognize very much. But I'd love to hear it from you. What was your experience like? I didn't even get a chance to ask you about your experience on the launch event, but I'm so grateful that you were there. But how was the experience for you as an attendee there? You know what? For the video viewers, I'm gonna grab mine. Oh, here we go. There it is. You and me both, man. It was a necessity on our journal to have that checklist with a very focused checkbox to make you feel good about being able to complete those tasks. Yeah, I'm really grateful that you were there. I mean, a lot of the conversations, including my keynote talk, was around productivity. And what's interesting is I really felt like my productivity keynote was very much like our episode of Better Productivity that we did on the Modern Mindset, like things that you and I talked about. I feel like really translated into our presentation that day. So I was really grateful that you were there. It's when you look at the group of individuals that were there at that event, we're looking at overachievers, high performers, people that really want to achieve great things. And having that type of community in the crowd together, you can feel that energy. And I challenged myself and Priya to think about how do we take an online Zoom experience and not make it feel like a business meeting, because Zoom meetings have been so overused since the test of time of all things lockdown and COVID that I just was worried that we wouldn't be able to put out a good show and make people enjoy themselves. But when we brought in a DJ, we had an MC, we had all this energy, and when I started seeing people go on webcam and dancing their butts off, like it got a little wild. I was really excited. Like, to me, I was like, okay, I think we did it. I think we made people feel so comfortable that they would be getting out of their seats and dancing and have a good time. So we're thrilled to do that. The trip to Vancouver and Alberta, I got to tell you, it was such a fascinating vacation because of the fact that we were heavily focused on check marking a lot of different destinations on our list that would seem overwhelming to someone. Like, if you saw the schedule that we had laid out from day one to the last day, it's overwhelming. It had nonstop activities. And, it's, to me, that was, I think, the best way to do Vancouver and Alberta, because they're very well known for the delicious restaurants that they have, on top of the incredible views and the scenery. More than anything else, it's not as much about wild excursions than it is about really taking in beauty and inspiration from what the universe has to offer. So the fact that we got to do that at a very heavy rate, I've never been on a vacation that was that active. Like, just to give you an idea, the second we landed on Alberta, usually, and I don't know about you, but usually when I land somewhere, first thing I look for is, let's check into the hotel, unpack our stuff, rest a little bit, maybe change and take a shower and go back out. We landed on the airport, and before we even looked at our hotel, we hit 4 destinations with all the luggage in our rental car. We didn't even check in yet. So we immediately touched down in the airport and we hit 4 destinations. And then at the end of the night, we got that excitement of seeing a hotel room that looks nice, and we got to crash and had a beautiful view in the hotel as well. So it was a new way of doing a vacation that I haven't thought of in the past. And I think in many ways, it kind of makes me think a lot about what we talked about with living in the present and enjoying the moment and escaping all of that. There's always parts where Priya and I would go out to places and we would just have to take a photograph, because we're just huge fans of capturing moments and sharing stories on social media. But there's one thing that I remember hearing from a photographer a long time ago that forever stuck with me. He would be a scenic photographer, and he would go all over the world, and he would do crazy things like climb a skyscraper and hang upside down while taking a photo. Like, he does these wild things. And one day in an interview, the photographer said that what he loves to do is he loves to capture photos, but then he made it a goal that every single time he finishes, he would put his camera physically down on the ground, and he would just sit there and take in the moment for like a good 10 to 20 minutes. And he made that his mission. And I think about how often we grab photos and we immediately run to the next destination, and we never really give ourselves the moment to take in what we just saw. And I thought that was a great concept that I decided to put into practice, that every single place we would go, we would get our content, our video, our photos out of the way, and just put our phones down and just take in everything. And we had opportunities where we rented like a Jeep, and I would climb on top of the Jeep, take our photos, and we'd just put it down and just sit on top of the roof of the Jeep, overlooking a beautiful mountain view with emerald blue lake. It's incredible to think that not even the photos that we took justifies how beautiful it really looked. And being able to take that in, I knew in that moment that I would not be able to trust my memory with how good it looked. So I made the most of every minute that I was there. But living in the present was never appreciated as much as it was when I was sitting there at that moment, taking it all in. Yeah. It reminds me of that statement that says less thinking, more being. And it really does put it into perspective, because we often put ourselves in this illusion that we think, which is the fact that we're living in a linear timeline, right? That we're moving forward and we have a past and we have a future that we're working towards, rather than the fact that who we are at this moment is who we're being, right? There is no such thing as past. It's us just evolving into who we are at the moment. And it's our mind that kind of drifts off and thinks about the past and says, man, like things were good or things were bad. Or our mind thinks about the future, which is, I'm freaking out. Like, imagine if I was so anxious about the future while I was on that trip, I would be thinking about the book launch event the entire time. And I'd be freaking out and I'd be like, yo, I can't enjoy this. I need to like open a laptop and work on my presentation, or promote the event a little bit harder because I need to make more sales. Like, I can't tell you the greatest feeling in the world when the event started. I heard music, I saw people coming in, I saw the excitement in the chat, I saw the beautiful faces when the webcams went on from all the participants, and I had no worry in the world. And I can't remember the last time I felt like that going into an event. And this was my event, this was my product. And so this is where I should have been the most anxious. But it gets really, really fun, Camille, when we talk about these things. And then when you get to put it into practice and come back and say, I actually saw this play out. It's beautiful when you can be historically right about these things. And I have no doubt now that the best thing to do in those moments leading up into the most stressful parts of your career or your life is to actually take a step back and breathe and live in the present, and then go back as this refreshed individual rather than someone that panics every step of the way. And I think going forward, that's going to be my mindset. I remember I actually shared that part during the Q&A of my event, and people were like shocked in the chat as if they didn't realize that you could do that. Like, you could take a break just before your busy launch, because most people will want vacations after to celebrate the fact that they finished it, but you're so burnt out after. You basically died, and it's not fun stressing out into what should have been an exciting part of your day. Think about like a wedding. Someone's about to get married, and leading into the day of their marriage, they hated every moment of it because they're stressing. Like, why not love while you're doing it? And Priya and I sometimes talk about that. It's like, we're busy, sometimes we're tired, sometimes we're stressed. And I said, listen, we chose this. Like, we could today give it all up and go back to like just focusing on having a 9 to 5 job, and after 5 p.m. we just chill and do nothing. And you know what? We'll have time, we'll have energy, we'll have freedom, we can be as lazy as we want, but we won't be able to appreciate a better life. And I said, for us to appreciate a better life, let's take thrill in the fact that we chose to do this and we get to do this. And that to me has significantly changed my outlook on what I think productivity means, which is the fact that I enjoy that I added this efficiency in my life because it gets me a little bit closer to the things that I want. Where the alternative is I could walk away from that. You talked about the gym, and I think the gym is very similar. Like, you don't have to go to the gym. You don't have to eat healthy, but you can't want the benefits of someone that does go to the gym and eats healthy without actually doing the work. So the fact that you go to the gym, the fact that you put in your energy and your effort and your time into it, I get excited while I'm in the gym. I don't dread the fact that I'm there. And I think that mindset can be laid out throughout everything when you think about getting things done in an efficient way. This ties in with what we talked about with the next part of our modern mindset, which is better experiences. It's the fact that I've experienced launches before, right? Like, I launched my book 4 years ago, and I remember that feeling of stress leading right into the last day of launch. As a matter of fact, I lost sleep the night before because I was worried no one would show up. And although it was a very successful launch, I hated the fact that I was there with lacking sleep. Like, I was tired at my launch event, and I was turned up, and I brought my energy because I was excited, but I was still exhausted at the same time. And that's not a fun feeling. And then I felt the same when I did the podcast release the first time. I felt the same with a lot of the speaking events that I go to, that when I get too anxious about that talk. I lose sleep. I don't feel like I perform my best, and I hate every moment leading up into it. And I have to empower like something like this podcast show that we do, because it makes me think about, why am I doing what I'm doing? It makes me a little bit more intentional. When we do modern mindset, I start thinking like, what is my modern mindset around a special occasion and a special event? And then I ask myself, like, why do we hate every moment leading up to that special occasion? Like, why does it make sense as a human being that we stress out every moment into what should have been a celebration? I had this conversation with Priya as well, because Priya was nervous about her part of the talk, because she doesn't speak as much as I do. And she was worried that she wouldn't do a good job on stage. And I had to remind her, I was like, listen, people aren't showing up because they're looking to have the best talk of all time. People bought tickets and they're showing up because they know you and they want to support the product that you're releasing. They're actually coming to celebrate. They're not coming to hear a game changer keynote, right? And when I realized that they're coming to celebrate, I said, why are we stressing out when our friends are coming to hang out? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And, that made me say, let's just do something crazy, like unplug completely, not even talk about our launch event the entire time we're on our trip. And let's come back and let's pick it up the day of. And when we came back and picked it up, I actually felt like every part of me was excited to be around these people again, because I felt like I just tasted life. It's almost like I went up there in the altitude of Vancouver mountains and tasted heaven, and I came back to celebrate, and I felt so good that I got to do that. So modern mindset isn't just about talking about what needs to change. It's about living it and practicing it. I'm really big on finding really like living the case study, being able to go out there and test it, field test it, try it out, see if the things that we put out there works. And it gets exciting when I can come back and say it works, or I get excited that it didn't work and I can come back and saying, hey, what happened and what do you think? And I think that's a big part of it, is paying attention to the fact that the moments that you choose in your life are worth celebrating, not stressing out over, and it can be dealt with differently. And I hope for anyone that listens to it, when you think about a monumental moment that's happening, whether it's whether it's a wedding, a job promotion, a launch event, or whatever it is, something substantial, just remember the fact that it's a moment of celebration, not a moment of stressing, and ask yourself how you can position yourself to celebrate it in the best way. And the answer will probably be by getting good sleep and getting excited for it, not stressing out and having sleepless nights. I love that so much, man. You said something that I agree with so much, which is also the understanding that you did the best you could, right? And like the fact is, when we were approaching the launch event date, the thing on my mind first was like, we need to sell more tickets, we need to get more people, we need to get more people. But when I came back from vacation, it changed and said, why am I focusing on the people that aren't coming? Why don't I focus on the people that are coming? Like, why don't we actually take care of the people that actually bought tickets and wants to be there? So we changed our entire conversation. I focused all my energy on people that are showing up. We gave the best damn event we could for the people that are showing up. And that's part of why we decided to hand deliver the presents. and show up and give the journals, leave it at the doorsteps for all our local buyers, because it's the people that support you that should be taken care of. And I think it's an important mindset to have, which is stop worrying about the other people that won't support you. Stop trying to convert the people that don't want to convert. Stop trying to change the people that don't want to be changed. Rather, focus on the people that were there with for you in the first place, and you'll get far better, not only a far better experience, but far better result just spending all your time on the people that would have supported you anyways. And the thing about sleep, I thought this was unique to me, but apparently I read a meme, and now I think it's a thing that matters to everybody. Apparently, the one thing we all do when we're trying to get some sleep is we always do the math in our head where we say, if I fall asleep at this exact moment, I will get exactly 5 hours and 43 minutes of sleep. Like that thing happens so many times to me in the middle of the night. And I bet it happens to you as well. It does. And, and and this is why I'm a really big fan of today's conversation. And you brought it up to my attention just last night, which I get excited about, because I think it doesn't give us too much preparation time to come back with a whole spiel. It's more like, what do we think and how do we live about this topic right now? And the conversation you brought to my attention last night was, let's talk about better presence. And I actually kicked off this morning by saying, like, hey, let me actually look at the definition of presence, because I want to tackle the different areas of presence. And one of them is actually what we're talking about right now, which is the state of being present, and the importance of that, right? Like the living in the present and not overthinking about what's about to happen in the future, focusing on what you can control and not the things you can control, is such a big part of living with better presence. And I think that's a huge part of it. But the second part, which I think is a fantastic way to transition from what you just said, is how you allow yourself to be in different settings, right? Is that part of you that sometimes feels the need to adjust because you're maybe playing to a different crowd. And in my book launch, it was like, am I playing to the crowd of people that don't want to actually be there, or should I just be myself to the people that do want to be there? And it was a debate that I had to have with myself in order to make that transition. But the idea of presence that you brought up to my attention, that I think is really worth talking about, is how we allow ourselves to be in different social settings, right? You think about settings that you're in. Our last episode was about better relationships, and it's worth talking a little bit today about how we allow ourselves to be in on a first date, and then in a relationship, someone that's very different from you, but as we also said, very complementary to you. How do you allow yourself to be present in that moment, and what does that presence look like? How do you allow yourself to be around a circle of friends where there's different personalities, and some may feel like they need to be more dominant than others, some may be quieter than others? Do you allow yourself to be, and how loud do you allow yourself to be in that manner? And then finally, how do you allow yourself to be in environments that isn't your ideal comfort zone setting, right? Like uncomfortable areas, even like business meetings, or places where the way you are and who you are matters for the result that you're about to get, such as a job interview or in a corporate setting or in a networking event, for example. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, but I want to start, Camille, with maybe the inspiration behind better presence, whether it was because of maybe something you experienced recently that made you think about it, or maybe just the fact that you felt like it was the next best thing to talk about based on the structure of our podcast show. What are your thoughts when you thought about better presence as being today's topic? This is such an interesting topic, and it actually kind of brings me back to something that you shared quite some time ago, which is you talked about like why we get taught not to cheat in games, and you brought up the fact that it's not always about just about being honest or having integrity. Sometimes you're being taught to not cheat in games so that you can be invited to more games. And I really love that perspective because I think in many ways it that same mindset kind of relates in the dance of a conversation that happens, especially in a situation like a date, right? Sometimes the dance that's happening at the very beginning is about getting each other to the element where you can both be yourselves and coexist. But at the very beginning, there's this bit of a dance that needs to happen based on the fact that there is guards up, there is some filters and bias and past thoughts and memories that maybe makes you a little bit hesitant to show that side of yourself. So a lot of that, what I think happens at the very beginning is the back and forth to really allow each other to get the guard down, but not lose your identity in the process, which is why there's like it's a bit of a middle ground that you need to play with. And I agree with you. Like, I think when someone says, hey, you're nice, but I think you're just a friend, or hey, you're nice, but not my type. I don't think nice is actually the right word, but I think nice was the best word that they could have come up with at that time, right? Like, it's more like you're not allowing yourself to show who you are. So you just seem like anyone else that I've met, right? And like you're saying the same things everyone else would have. You're very predictable. Where I think on the other side, when someone says, "Oh, you're an asshole, you're a jerk, or you're a bad guy," and whatever, like you hear those things, and somehow they're interested, and then guys think like you got to be an asshole to get more dates. I think what that actually means, again, it's just a lack of word. I think that they haven't figured out the right terminology to use. But to me, I think that's more on the side that they're unapologetically themselves. They get that taste of like refreshment because it's like, oh, I didn't see this side before from the other guys I was seeing, but all of a sudden I'm seeing it from you. And I think that unapologetic side doesn't always need to be presented as someone that is bad. It's more like someone that's willing to disagree because it didn't align with their core beliefs. Someone that's willing to throw in their perspective, even if it isn't the popular opinion. And I think to me, that gets really, really interesting because what that means is, I think to me, it means that you're so confident in yourself that you don't feel like you have to be someone else to impress the other person. And the problem with even like putting on this act, let's even be frank about our past, Camille. Like you and I, we used to like really be in so deep into the psychology of socializing and like how to have a connection with another person. And we used to read about on a lot of this and exchange notes. And back then we believed everything we read. And a lot of these things that were teaching us were about like using recited scripts that we practice ahead of time in order to portray some sense of value that we have in ourselves. And I used to try them, and to its credit, in some ways it worked because those scripts were fun, engaging stories that would tend to create a bit of mystery around you or would tend to get some kind of appeal out of the other person. And it worked. The problem with it working is that at the end of the day, that script comes to an end. And when that script comes to an end, you're now panicking, thinking you're not good enough as your own being. Your identity is not attractive, and you start becoming clingy. You start becoming anxious. You start thinking any second now she'll know you're fake, and you'll end up losing her. Where I start thinking where things get interesting, where it made me move away from that approach, is the idea that if you truly love yourself, you'll be unapologetic every single time that you show up in different ways. Now, given the way that you speak in a boardroom might be a little bit of the way that you speak in a pub. The way that you speak when you're in a karaoke night after 3 shots might be very different from how you speak maybe at a banquet, when you're about to give a toast, for example, or maybe not, depending on how ballsy you are. But at the end of the day, it excites me to think about the fact that you can still be yourself with a different outfit. You can still be Camille with a tuxedo on versus Camille with shorts and a t-shirt on that goes for a swim at a vacation cottage. So to me, I think when you start driving into that side, things start getting really, really interesting. You and I actually talked about this recently, and it opened up a really cool revelation, which is I started asking, why do we get nervous at the very beginning when we meet people? And why do we, like, what is it actually that's causing us to get nervous? And I think the conclusion that I left with is the fact that I get nervous because of how much I hate small talk. And the fact that I love the deep introspective conversation, the thing you and I do every single time we get on the microphone on this podcast show. But I also know, similar to you don't cheat so you get invited to more games, I also know you have to get through the small talk crap in order to get into the deeper introspecting conversations that I love. And I get nervous about the small talk because I feel like I'm not that great at it. Like it's not, I don't like the whole like, hey, what are we having on the menu today? Oh, this looks good. Oh, where'd you guys fly in from today? Oh, how was the drive? What a beautiful restaurant. Like I don't like doing those things, but I know it's sometimes a necessity in the dance of conversation in order to do the things that I want. And I think that's why I get nervous about the first part. But once I overcome that, I feel like I get very, very comfortable. I'm curious if that was your conclusion from our conversation as well, and your take around the whole dance of conversation, which I think gets really, really fun. Right. Like that feeling of the first time when you get to that level of meditation where you can separate your thoughts from yourself, it gets really, really exciting because you start realizing that you're not necessarily the thoughts, but you're the one that's observing the thoughts. And as the observer, when you can start seeing the thoughts as a third party and you start seeing how it's affecting your life, you can almost now pinpoint and rewire a lot of the way of your thinking. So to me, that's probably the biggest reason why I love the idea of meditation, because it starts making you understand why your identity is the way it is, right? Like the thing about identity, I'm in the world of marketing and branding, and I talk about this with branding, which is branding is basically the fact that you don't necessarily say I want a brand or don't want a brand. The brand happens regardless by you just living, right? Like when you go into a networking event and you shake a hand and you make a bad impression, you now have a bad brand. As a matter of fact, branding isn't just business. Like the friend that's always late to an event, they're known to be the late person. That's their brand, right? Like they're known, they have a reputation of being that person. Well, I think identity is the same thing, right? It's not like you can just say, hey, I don't want to have an identity. Your identity is growing and evolving every single day. And unfortunately, if you're not intentional about how you carve that identity to be who you want to be, it's going to on autopilot become what it thinks it should be, and it's usually conditioned by how society is treating it, right? It's you're consuming information every day. You're watching TV shows. You see how characters respond. You see how people fall in love on TV shows. You hear stories from other people. You read books, and all of a sudden you think this is who I need to be as an identity. But what gets exciting as an observer is when you realize that you can actually make that identity what you want to be. And I think I got really, really obsessed with that. Now, I will admit this. It's gotten a lot easier because I've built myself a little bit of a following and a little bit of a status over the years in social media and marketing, being that I kind of have defined my identity on paper out loud to the world. So whenever I show up, it's kind of like people already kind of know who I am, right? They kind of know my story when by the fact that I published a book. They kind of know what my relationships are. They kind of know what my thought process and my way of thinking are through things like speaking on stage and this podcast show. So people are already kind of familiar with where I stand. So when I show, there's already a little bit of a prejudice in who I am before I even get up on stage. It's kind of like I think we talked about this with like superheroes. When Batman shows up, you don't need Batman to reintroduce himself. You already know that he's this, like, it would be weird if all of a sudden he cracked a joke, right? Like you just know who he is. And like, because of that, he has formed an identity that people will already recognize, where to a point where people will actually get mad if the writers do a bad job in being consistent with that identity. So my question to people is, are you being consistent with your identity? Because if all of a sudden you're showing up in a different environment and you're inconsistent with who you are, you start actually having a bit of an identity crisis. And it may reflect good or bad in that circumstance, but long term it does a lot of damage, because what ends up happening is that you've been putting on an act for so long that you lost who you think you are. And it starts becoming really difficult to come back full circle. Where I saw a big advantage, in the very early stage, I felt the need to reintroduce myself. But when I would reintroduce myself, I started introducing myself in the way I wanted to be presented, not in the way that they wanted to see me presented. And that's very important, because when you think about how people want you to be presented, is you're going to automatically start doing what you think society wants you to do. You're going to automatically start doing what you think you're supposed to do in that social setting, rather than saying, this is who I said I was going to be every day. And it wasn't until the moment that I released a book talking about my whole life story that I feel like I've truly stamped and signed off on my identity, saying this is who I want to be forever. And since then, I've been growing and building on that side of me. And now I'm at this point now where I have to be that person, because I've spent so many years talking about it. So I've actually I've positioned myself in a way to make it so difficult for me to lose myself. And the great thing about putting things down on tangible books or on social media is that I have endless reminders to remind me who I am every single day. What I would ask the average person, someone that's maybe in the early stage of discovery, is what are you doing every day to remind yourself what your identity is? Are you doing something about it? Are you either putting it down on paper through things like journaling, or are you speaking to friends about it, where you start getting familiar with yourself? Because when you start writing it down or describing it to someone, it starts becoming real, right? We talked about this with thoughts and the problem with inner thoughts, which is the fact that you more often than not don't realize this, but you actually don't complete thoughts in your head. You always have run on sentences. You stop halfway and you go to another thought. Something distracts you and you never come back to the thought. But when you're speaking to someone or you're writing it down, by just the way that the communication works, you're forced to put a period at the end of your thoughts. You're forced to complete that thought. So as a result of that, by articulating it as much as you can, you start making it part of your real identity. So what I encourage people to do is actually speak it out more often than they used to, not only in their head, but out loud to other people, or at least down on paper if they don't feel comfortable sharing that part of yourself. When you start having a concrete identity of who you want to be and what your stories are, you now have something to compare it to know if you're being consistent with who you said you want to be. You know, if I came back from a social setting and let's say admittedly, like I'm very shy, I'm not the funniest in the room, I'm not usually the loudest in the room, I'm just someone that is somewhere there that's comfortable being in the present. If all of a sudden I'm being someone that's not that, I start asking myself why. And it may not be a bad thing. It may be like, hey, people were just looking for entertainment and no one was really bringing it, so I figured I have a funny story I want to share. Like, it may be for good reasons, but at least now you compared it with your identity to know every single day. I think, Camille, I think the biggest miss is that most people don't spend enough time thinking about who they want to be in this world. And when you don't spend enough time, like a brand, you're letting your identity grow on autopilot. such a different yet very interesting perspective. Actually, you got me thinking about a lot of things here. So this is really fascinating. It's funny because even while you're saying the whole like, we aren't our identity, we're this thing that's always observing that's been observing us all our life. Like every time you say that, I get this mental visual of like a creature that I can't see because I'm looking at it from a first person, looking over the mountain at everything that I am. And it's funny because sometimes you see yourself saying like, oh, I'm really happy with who I become, right? Like that's almost like that. That's kind of what you just did. If you're like happy with who you become, you've actually like allowed yourself to observe the thing that you are now. And it's kind of interesting that that's the visual I get every single time you say it. And that's quite fascinating. And I actually think I do agree with you. You kind of move my needle a little bit with what you just shared, which I think it gets really, really fascinating. Now, this comes back to something I talked about in a previous episode, which is the idea of choosing your delusion, right? And choosing your delusion was more about beliefs and religion and what you choose to believe. Because at the end of the day, you're planting your flag without having the proof saying, this is what I want to do because this is what's serving me the best. I also now, and I'm saying this as something that may actually contradict what I was saying earlier, because you did change my perspective a little bit here. I think that the identity that we build for ourselves is to give ourselves the best advantages to get the things we want out of this life. Right. And it's kind of like when you play those video games and you get to add like more stamina, more charisma, more strength, more money, whatever it is, more education. You're kind of building the character to be able to win that game. And if you learn from the first round of playing that game that, oh, you know what, I realized that I should have been stronger because my guy's lazy and he doesn't want to move. Now you start playing the strength a bit more and you build that side of your character out. I think we're like that in this life as well. We're experiencing life. We're realizing what skill sets and soft and hard skills will get us the furthest that we want to. We also learn what internal identity and thoughts gets us the furthest. We also learn what capable, like how to be in a social setting to get the most advantages. And through all that, I think we form the identity that we feel that best serves us. And different people will have, like religion, right? Like other core values, people will have different opinions. Some people will say, oh, humility will get us the further. Some people will say kindness will get us the furthest. Some people will say like, oh, being the loudest. Some people really do believe that being the funny person will get you to the top. We also know a lot of people bank on appearance being the only way to get you to the top. So these things are the identity that we build, being that we think that this is what's going to get us to the top. Now, what the top means is different things, right? I think it's about becoming your best self in order to achieve the most that you can. It may be financial, it may be better relationships, but to me, it's just happiest, right? It's like, what identity will make me the happiest? And I think that allows me to form the thing that I want to form. And this, I think, could either be seen as something that's very depressing, or it could be seen as a beautiful advantage. I like the idea that you realize that at this given moment, you could reshape your identity to be who you want it to be to get you the most happiest or whatever X is to you. To me, it's happiest. And that means that if you feel like the identity you have today is not allowing you to get that X, you now have an opportunity to think about why that's the case and what you can change about it. So I don't know. I agree with everything you said, but the fact that you maybe want to abandon it, I don't know if abandoning it is the right idea, but rather creating the identity of what will help you get the furthest is what makes more sense to me. More like rejigging it than abandoning it. As a matter of fact, I'm curious on getting your thoughts on what abandoning an identity even means, because what are you being every day if you don't have that identity? Like, can it even be abandoned? Like, what does that mean to you? Yeah, and this is the beautiful thing about this podcast show, man. It gets me thinking a lot, and more often than not, it changes or enhances my perspective on things, which is why I like giving us the freedom of saying, "Hey, let's just share a thought that we're having at this present moment, and if a few episodes from now we changed our mind, let's talk about it again." And I love that. I think that's worth pointing out is that these are more about discussions about what we believe today. It's not about what's right or wrong, and this is why I like the platform of us potentially having things that are conflicting, and it doesn't end with who's right and who's wrong. It's let's throw those conflicting ideas so that we give our viewers an opportunity to really take in different perspectives. Now what I'm hearing from you is interesting because I like what you said. Is like you don't want to be able to write it down and look at it and say this is who I am. But to me, the way that you're defining identity speaks to me more and more in a similar way of like what clothing you choose to wear or what piece of armor you choose to hold on to, and maybe you're defining that on paper, right? Like this is how you choose to coexist in the world. This is how you choose to show up, and this is what you choose to wear. And I think that could be defined. Now, what I would say about your pursuit of peace, which I think is very beautiful, and in many ways I think it overlaps with my belief of happiness, is the fact that yes, the identity component and abandoning that, it probably makes sense that that part needs to be separated and long distance in order for you to get that peace, so that you're not trying to live up to the identity that you define every single day. However, I think there's the other part of the conversation, which is, but for you to have peace, you need to have a couple parts of your life taken care of, right? Like for example, you need to let money not to be the thing that makes you give up on your core beliefs. Like if you're broke and you have a hungry stomach and not a roof over your head, you got to kind of go out there and find a way to get that money, which means you need to find a way to play well in the world of society, right? Like how do you earn income? How do you get a job interview? How do you get people to buy your products if you choose to be an entrepreneur? So there is that level of still showing up with an identity that needs to get you that peace. And I think that where that identity bias comes in is trying to figure out what it is, who it is that you need to be in order for you to achieve the thing so you can get peace. So I feel like there's that other layer for it where I think you and I are on the same thing. Like I kind of want happiness at the end of the day to be something where I can put the armor of identity down and saying I love where I am and who I am. But I know for to get to where I am and who I am, I need to use the identity to propel myself ahead. And I think that part comes in with building myself and understanding what works well. Now the identity needs to change, the identity needs to evolve, and the identity frequently needs to adapt to the environment, right? Like a big part of my identity is tied in with who I've presented myself to be every day through things like technology, things like social media, digital tools, online. I mean, my virtual event was virtual for God's sakes, right? It was all on online, but it's a tool that I use to put myself out there more. If I didn't adapt, if I didn't have that expectation of adapting, or worse, I pushed it away, like we've seen a lot of people do from the older generation, I think you're really giving yourself you're really holding yourself back from what you could have been able to achieve as your best self if you weren't open-minded. So I do think the identity needs to evolve. But one thing that you've really sold me on today that I never really thought about is kind of thinking of it as a third-party tool rather than who you are every single day. I've had this conversation quite often with different people that I talk about in the industry, and I tell them about how, when I leave this world, when I get buried one day, I don't want people to come out and talk about how, oh, Mahfouz was a marketer or a speaker or a podcaster. I almost want them to not be able to answer who I was to them, because I want to be this floating entity of everything that I was, that's just difficult to describe. And I think I'm at peace with that. I think I'm at peace with the fact that it can't be defined of who I am, but the fact that I was able to be content with who I am every single day and not resist it. I think it's when you get to that part in your life where you really don't want to be this person. You don't want to wear this costume, but you're wearing it because you feel like it's the only way to go. I think that's a great indicator that something needs to change, and that you're playing it for the wrong reasons. I want to dig into that a little bit more. I think what you're saying is really fascinating, and I want to kind of see this play out in a practical way in a social setting. So when you think about the comfort of detachment, which I think was a great perspective, especially when we're both starting to think of it more as a tool that you use and you can put it down. What does that look like in a practical scenario? You know, you get together with a group of friends, and in this scenario, just so we can play out both sides, let's say there are personalities that you do know, but there are also some personalities that you haven't got to know, so that we can kind of see how it plays out with strangers as well as people you know well. How do you let what you just said play out in a practical way where you're allowing yourself to kind of be Camille as Camille and maybe not as the tool of an identity that you want to use in that setting? I think that's a really good point. And, I have to point out the fact that this is something that I used to struggle with, and maybe I still struggle with once in a while, which is when you come in with the perspective of chiming into the conversations, sometimes you feel like you have to chime into no matter what's being said, even if you don't know anything about it. But what I've been lately doing that I've really pushed the needle on is feeling comfortable with saying this doesn't interest me, nor do I have anything to say, and just hang back or let the other person talk, or if there's a group of people, let them talk it out and hang back and be fine with it. But you know what, where I get really excited is the fact that I'm genuinely curious about learning everything, anything. And to your point, I agree with, which is that I don't think anyone's really boring. I think sometimes maybe they just did a poor job articulating what the exciting part of that conversation is. So what I get excited about is actually asking the questions to learn about what's being said, and then chiming in what my perspective on that topic is if I feel like there's something worth putting in there. Like when you say when you started talking about some of these things, like, it's really interesting to me, and it's even more interesting to me that I didn't think about it from that perspective. So now I'm like edge of the seat asking more questions and learning about it. Where I think the hijacking comes in is when when you completely mute the conversation until you hear something that gives you an opportunity to share your story. You're just waiting, and then you're like, oh, this is my cue, and you jump in, and all of a sudden you just hijack that entire conversation. What I get excited about is like this is something you and I get very much, and I wish I knew how to articulate it well, because sometimes it happens over the course of 4 to 8 hours in a sitting, which is the fact that I can never figure out how we started from one topic and ended the night on another. And it goes from like what we saw on social media, a funny meme, to like darkest like death. What does death mean? And if we actually spent our time going through it, we can actually backtrack and figure out how it transitioned. And the transitions were so fluid that it was never meant to jump ship. Like there was no strategy. It just made sense for that thing to be talked about right after. And it becomes this beautiful, as our boy Kanye West says, this beautiful symphony that we play from beginning to end. There was one time where you and I recorded and we forgot that it was recording and we just had a hangout session. I loved listening to that because for the first time I was paying attention to why it went to the next topic and to the next topic and to the next topic. And I think when you can get to that level, it becomes quite beautiful because it's not about what's interesting to you only. It's not about what you want to add only. It's about just be, just be and let the conversations happen. And where you and I are able to do that, that I wish I could do this with anyone in the world, but I'm not sure what's needed for that to happen. But it's the fact that you and I can sit down and never once do I worry about like, hey, what do I want to talk to Camille about today? It's just we say, let's meet up here, let's give us a time, and then it just happens. And I can't remember the last time it wasn't an incredible experience. Like, and I like the word experience because that's what it feels like to me. It's like a conversation and a hangout with you is a freaking experience, man. Like we're like, you know what, we talked about what vibing means many episodes ago, but that's what it is. It's from the outside, it's just two people facing each other and having a conversation. But on the inside, like my mind is going through this supernova of transitions and evolving, and like lights are going on and electricity is sparking. And then at the very end, we say goodbye, and I feel burnt out for like a week because I had so much energy. I went through such an experience. It's crazy. What do you think is needed for that to happen, where you can just be and let this beautiful symphony happen? I imagine that it's kind of the responsibility of both parties to let that happen, right? I just want to throw the funny yet graphic moment at the very end when we realize that we're getting kicked out of the venue because the lights are turning off. And then you and I realize we both have to use the bathroom, and we're literally standing side by side in a urinal saying, "What the hell just happened?" Because it was the realization that we just went through like the darkest conversations, but it started from like a funny meme talk. Like it's crazy how often that happens. But man, I wouldn't trade anything in the world for that because the amount I grow through that conversation is quite beautiful. But sorry, I just had to share that hilarious graphic moment at the end. But because like I remember I laughed because I was talking with Priya on the phone after my ride home, and I was telling her I was like, the night ended with Camille and I standing side by side in the bathroom saying, "What the hell just happened?" But yeah, what needs to happen for two people to just be in that kind of setting? the interesting thing here is the fact that you don't connect with every person, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on if that's two identities coming together and figuring out that it doesn't mesh, or is there something else that causes it not to mesh. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of people in what I do in my career, and I would say what I got really good at is after one or two conversations I can tell whether I'm going to vibe with that person or not. And if I'm not going to vibe with that person, there's no judgment, because I realize that what that simply is that we brought who we are in the same room, and it just doesn't, it's just not complementary, right? It's ludicrous to think that all personalities would be complementary to each other and be able to connect. So I don't judge, but if I don't vibe with someone in one or two conversations, I just don't try to build that relationship anymore, because frankly, it's just exhausting as a human being to try to vibe with someone that you're not meant to vibe with. I've accepted that part. And that connects with heavily with what you just said, which is not everyone in the world is going to like you for who you are. And that part needs to be accepted, because if you're trying to force other people to like you, you're either exhausting your energy to convince them, or you're trying to be someone you're not so that they do like that fake personality instead, because of they didn't like who you were to begin with. So when you start becoming comfortable with the fact that not everyone in the world is going to like you, what I get excited about is, why not just use the energy on the people that you do connect with and you do vibe with, and actually spend energy with them. And actually, this perfectly ties in with what I said about the launch event, which is why try to bring on people that don't want to buy tickets. Instead, invest all your energy on people who already bought tickets. Think of it as the same with people who invested in you. Why spend time on people that haven't invested in you and who you are, but rather the ones that have always been here, always been supporting you to begin with. And what happens in those environments is that it feels seamless. The feeling of sitting down with someone and not having this paranoia voice in your head of what to say next, that part gets kind of crazy. And to me, that thing drives me nuts, especially I have to say, on first dates, or the anticipation leading into a first date, it's terrifying when that voice goes off and says, what if this happens, if that happens, I better make sure I say this, I better not do this. I hate that part of it. But the more you get comfortable with the fact that you're only trying to vibe with people that you vibe with, and you're not trying to impress someone that you don't vibe with, you start becoming at peace, and the voice starts becoming very, very quiet. Because what happens then is you're going into dates with being yourself, and the voice is not saying, oh, don't do this or do this, right? You just know who to be every single time. And this is a fun part of dating, and how Priya and I got together, is that when Priya and I first started dating, it's like I got really excited about the fact that if we didn't vibe, I was okay with walking away. And what that meant was that I was very unapologetically myself. And it just so happened that she, kind of through her journey, was also unapologetically herself. And those two unapologetically human beings vibe very well together, and it became an incredible thing. You also think about like the small talk, and I like what you're saying, which is the fact that you almost try to bypass it by doing something funny or doing what you want to do, because you just don't care about the small talk. I thought about the fact that last year when we first started dating, it's like I was 34 and she was 29, which means we're kind of older than the average couple that usually dates, especially through an online app, I would think. And when I used to date in like my teenage years or early 20s, it was kind of like you played the whole game and you're socially awkward and trying to figure it out. By the time you're in your 30s, you've already dated. Like, we knew when we came into that room that we've gone through relationships, or else it's a little scary to think that might be their first date at that age, right? Like, that might be a little weird. So I liked the fact that I started off the conversation with like, okay, let's get it out of the way. What happened? Like, why are you here and why am I here? Because what that allowed us to do is it allowed us to, first of all, drop the parts of us that we were worried about, right? Like, why are we still dating at that age? Or what was our last relationship like? Do we have any battle scars from our past relationships we're bringing in? It allowed us to kind of laugh it off and throw it into the ring and get it over with. And I got to tell you, that was probably what set tone of the rest of our relationship of where we are today. And actually, I'm excited to announce that today is our 1 year anniversary that I'll be celebrating with her later today. So exactly 1 year ago, it happened, which means it's very fresh in my head. And I can say that it was because of those moments that allowed me to be. So I think that's where I'm going with this, Camille, is to get to that momentum or an experience of epic conversations with someone. You have to first and foremost be okay with the fact that you may not vibe with that person and it may just never happen because they're probably bringing another set of experiences. Just take language as a simple example. If language was what was the barrier based on the two experiences that you have, you're probably not going to vibe, right? And you're probably going to have that's going to be a big enough limitation to not let you vibe. But if the experiences that you both bring to the same table are enough to vibe, then you just allow yourself to be. And allowing yourself to be, meaning it's almost actually what you were suggesting as abandoning your identity. I think that's what it is. I think we're not worried about how the other person thinks of us. I like that I can share even the most embarrassing stories and not feel like you're going to think of me differently, right? And I like that because I think that's truly putting our identity down, so letting everything come out, and then being okay with the fact that it's just going to have this beautiful experience of back and forth with each other. But it only happens if both parties, or if all parties in that room, are willing to do it. I'm sure you can relate to experiences where things are going well, but then this one person joins the conversation and the energy is gone. Why? Because that vibe that got inserted into this rotation has now put up a few shields. Maybe someone doesn't trust that person that entered. Maybe that person brings in a different energy that's not worth like keeping up with them. So it changes the room. So I think it's very important and the responsibility for all parties to do that. And only when everyone does that can this beautiful experience be had. Yeah, and this makes me think a lot about what we talked about in the past with Carl Jung's archetype, right? Which is the fact that you're not just one thing, right? There's other parts of you that also matter. And Carl Jung's archetypes talks about 12 different desires, and the fact that every single human being has these desires, but the truth is that what makes your heartbeat go a little bit faster may be different from what makes my heartbeat go a little bit faster, which means that we gravitate towards different things based on the way that our archetypes are built. And this means that, in your story about that hilarious friend that came in the middle of a serious conversation, it doesn't mean that he didn't need to be himself. It just means that he's playing the wrong part of his archetype, right? It's just that he's playing the funny card when it's not the right setting. It's like, it doesn't mean he's just funny. Like, even funny people have deep thoughts. Even deep people have funny thoughts. Even the quietest, shyest person has funny thoughts. So there's different parts of you that can coexist depending on the setting. And I like the fact that being aware of the setting is important, because the setting will be a great indicator of which part of you to allow yourself to be, right? You don't go into the funeral. What's that one song? Going to the funeral, cracking jokes. I'm the guy that cracks jokes at a funeral. That song there that comes to mind. You gotta kind of understand the environment that you're in. And I think your friend could have still coexisted. It's not like he needed to leave. It's just he needed to know which part of him to that made sense. And you put it so beautifully, which is that you could, you might have still been able to mesh. Maybe the timing wasn't right. And I think that that is a fascinating tale. The other side that actually stands out to me is that not all conversations are meant to vibe, which means that if it doesn't vibe, it doesn't mean you get disappointed or even walk away from it. Like, why is vibing the only goal? Where I get interested is when I don't vibe, there's a part of me that's kind of like, that means this person is so different from me. And then what I get excited about is I want to know more about that, because there's clearly things that that person has experienced that I haven't, or they see things in a way that I haven't, and I want to get a little bit of that. I want to understand that a little bit better, to see maybe there's some things there that I could maybe take on in my paradigm shift and learn a little bit more. So I let the non-vibing, non-fluid, uncomfortable way of conversation still happen. I still go through that whole like, okay, this isn't the ideal way I'd like to get to know someone, but I still got what I wanted out of it, which is I wanted to learn a little bit more from someone else's perspective. So it is important to note that what you're doing is you're trying to get a feel of what the conversation is and who the person is, and then decide what that relationship is like. We talked about this with relationships, which is doing a better job in defining the relationship with that person. Not all relationships are meant to be best friends that vibe 24 hours. Not all relationships are meant to be romantic. Not all relationships are meant to be just for transactional reasons, right? Like, there are relationships that can happen for different reasons. So by you being able to define that, you could still have a relationship with someone that you don't vibe with. Are you going to be seeing them as frequently? Probably not, because you probably don't get that excited when you have a hangout with them, but just know why you're there. I've done a lot of lunches and dinners where people want to pick my brain and get some advice on marketing, and I know that's why I'm there. So I let that be the reason why I'm there. We may not vibe, but at least I can answer some questions and maybe get to know them a little bit. If I'm going there to have a meal, at least I got my meal out of the way, even if the conversation wasn't pleasant. Just know why you're going somewhere, and that will dramatically help with understanding the part of you that you're really allowing to sing every single time. And it's very difficult to let all parts of you sing in one setting, especially because you have a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of time. But it's fully available for you to sing whichever part of you want to, regardless of what setting you're in. And I allow that to be the case. I've gotten really, really comfortable, Camille, with not trying to be the loudest or the funniest person in the room, where I can tell you once upon a time that used to eat me alive. I hated when someone was getting more laughs than I was. I hated when someone was getting more attention than I was. What I love now is I go in with the objective of getting to know even one person. And if I got to know one person and have a side conversation with them and I leave the room, I feel excellent and I feel amazing. And to me, that means far more than trying to have the room laughing and roaring at every single thing that I say. Dude, I love that so much. And the fact that you get the opportunity to see how Camille as a human being operates in that strange environment, it's not readily available anytime you want it. So the fact that you get to see that, not many people know how to respond under all settings. I was even thinking about this earlier, is that I get to know what I'm like and how people perceive me when I get on stage and speak. I now get to perceive how I now get to see how people perceive me when they hear a podcast episode, and how I show up and how I am, right? Like, and now you get to kind of see that, but not everyone in the world does, right? Like, do people really know how they're being when they're on stage in front of thousands of people? No. Do people really know how they're sounding when the microphone goes on? No. We get to do that all the time, and we take it for granted because of how readily available it is for us. But then this also begs the question, is like, what other circumstances can we put ourselves in that isn't readily available to see how we function and how we show up and who we are being in that moment? So I love that you allow yourself, you almost like emerge the moment, and you put yourself out there to see how you respond. And it's kind of nice to see that you got a positive reaction to yourself based on how you felt like you did under that circumstance. So I love that. I think that's such a great way. And it actually brings me back to like a lot of games that we used to play with our group of friends when we were younger. But what's funny is like we never really realized that those would help our social skills. Remember how we used to like go around and be like, you got to add something, or you got to rhyme the last rhyme. It's like we're actually teaching ourselves to be quick on our feet without realizing it. And I love that we kind of played the right games by accident to prepare ourselves for those moments every step of the way. But I like that a lot. But one other thing I wanted to bring up as we're approaching our near the tail end here is something that you said earlier that I want to make sure it doesn't get lost in translation, which is the conditioning, our upbringing that results in us telling the stories in our head that we do. For example, you were just talking about how you tell yourself you're not funny, but it's like, here's something worth considering is like, why do you say that you're not funny? Like, are you actually not funny, or is that the story that you're saying in your head? For a very long time, I've been saying I'm shy, and I believe I'm shy. And it results in me going into a room being so quiet until I finally get comfortable. But part of me is also saying, am I actually shy, or am I feeding myself that story and it becomes my truth? Because when I go on stage, I become an absolute rock star to a point where people don't believe that I'm shy. So like there's parts of me that thinks that there's a lot of things that we've been conditioned to believe, if not by our own stories and our own observations, maybe by what's being told to us when we were maybe treated poorly once upon a time. Maybe when our parents were being mean to us, or friends in school were being mean, or like we were getting bullied and stuff like that. Like people tell you things of who you are, maybe in a negative way to hurt your feelings, but you forever hold that in your identity, that who I am, right? If someone, if you go out on a date and a girl says, I have to be honest, you're very boring, I don't think we can see each other anymore. You may go on the rest of your life saying, I'm boring. And then by telling yourself that truth, you're now preventing yourself from being more confidently open and sharing stories that are in the back of your head. I think what you said in the way that you defined identity is quite beautiful, which is the fact that you get to observe it. You get to lay it down. You get to change it for your own advantage. And I think what's worth considering is using that to recondition yourself, to take out the parts that you were fed once upon a time and put in something new. I've battled with shyness for a very long time, especially because I was raised under a very conservative household. In a household where I was taught to play it safe my entire life. I was raised to not talk to strangers. And I have to say, for a very long time, it was difficult for me to speak with people I don't know. And even today, once in a while, it will sneak in back into my head. But I can honestly say it's been exciting for me to recondition that, where on any given day, I can jump on a plane, go to an event on the other side of this world, and be very comfortable with shaking a few hands as I make my way up to the stage. And I think that can only be done when you create that separation. But I think it's worth, as an observer, looking at the parts of your identity that maybe you don't want to hold on to and ask yourself, can that be changed? I'm curious to get your take on that, because you brought up conditioning. And I want to think about, can that conditioning be changed? And if you have a strategy around, or an example around maybe how you've done that in the past. Bro, this is a perfect way to wrap up this episode, man. I love the emphasis on the idea of being kind to your younger self as well, and in having that understanding of why maybe you may be thinking the way you do. And not, not being able to live in the past. It's sometimes even hard to figure out why that really happened, right? You're not feeling the same emotions. You kind of feel that with and I'm sure you're feeling this right now with writing the book, is trying to tap into the emotions of what you felt when that moment happened is very difficult. And you have to have that level of empathy to understand that it may be there. But as you said so nicely, is figuring out whether or not it serves you, and when it serves you and how it serves you, because there might be areas where it's good for you but maybe long term it's bad for you. I think it's worth thinking about those things to modify that. So I think that's so perfectly put. Camille, I want to thank you for bringing in such a beautiful topic into this series, man. I was a little unsure about the word presence when you first said it to me. I wasn't sure how we were going to approach this, but the idea of connecting it with not only being in the present, but how you're presenting yourself through the identity, and how what identity is defined as, I think is a great way to present this topic. So I appreciate so much, and I'm actually extremely thrilled with how much we've chopped up about it in the last 2 hours with very little preparation. I just want to very quickly just finish up by asking the viewers the housekeeping things that I sometimes forget to do far too often, which is the fact that if you are watching us on this live stream that we do on YouTube every single Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern time, now that we're back from our season break, we are going to continue doing it every single Sunday. I encourage you to watch us live during that time. And if not, just watch the replay anytime you want, so you get to see the full visuals. Camille and I today held up the epic productivity journal. And if you aren't watching the video, you're just going to have to use your imagination. Just picture the most beautiful thing in the world held in our hands, and that is the journal. But if you are watching us on YouTube, we encourage you to hit the like and subscribe button so that you're the first to know every single time a new episode releases, every single time we go live. And by hitting the like, you're helping YouTube do all the magic algorithm stuff so that other people that are lovers of personal development can find us as well. And if you are listening to the replay on any of the audio platforms like Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, and so forth, please do follow along and hit the subscribe button as well so that you get notified every single time. Your feedback is our oxygen. Your comments is what keeps us going, and we appreciate greatly that you're listening in. Camille, from me to you, man, I just want to thank you again for always bringing your A game. I know we were a little bit rusty, thinking that we're going to be rusty and maybe not bring our A game, but bro, you never disappoint, and I'm grateful to have you as a co-host for today's conversation as well. Hey man, in the spirit of modern mindset, we're always getting better, and I'm only excited about seeing that our episodes keep getting better and better. Viewers, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week. We're excited, and thank you for listening to Chapter 8 of the Modern Mindset Podcast. Have a great day, and we'll speak again soon. Take care, everyone.